What year was it again you met Elvis?
1976.
She staked him out at the Roadway Inn when he played here. So just, we'll ask her about that a little bit later on.
I tell you, I went on the next year in 77 to a show in Louisville, and he remembered me, and he shook my hand on this day.
That's awesome.
Was he at the Roadway Inn again?
I didn't go there.
What we do, right, for the people we love. We're obviously having this program because today would have been Elvis's birthday. My other vivid memory is when we lived in Arizona. My dad was an Air Force pilot, and we were at Luke Air Force Base. We traveled around on the weekends and just picnicked at different places, and there was a commotion on the side of the road, and we stopped to see what it was. It was Elvis filming the movie Stay Away Joe. I don't know how they were going to be twins and married to Elvis, but anyway, I didn't ask her. My other vivid memory is when we lived in Arizona. My dad was an Air Force pilot, and we were at Luke Air Force Base. We traveled around on the weekends and just picnicked at different places, and there was a commotion on the side of the road, and we stopped to see what it was. It was Elvis filming the movie Stay Away Joe, and I remember it was a fight scene, but what I remember most is being politely pushed out of the way by a group of nuns who made their way to the front to see me. So that is what I remember about Stay Away Joe, or the nuns who shoved me out of the way to get a closer look. As for our author, Alanna Nash, she says she became completely obsessed with Elvis as a 6-year-old girl watching him on the Ed Sullivan Show. Years later, she would cover his funeral for the Courier-Journal, would later write 4 books about Elvis and dozens of articles. Her book, The Colonel, The Extraordinary Story of Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley, was published way back in 2003, but made a roaring comeback in the wake of the recent Baz Luhrmann film Elvis. How many of you all have seen that movie? Applause if you liked it. Kisses if you didn't. No kisses? Okay, very good. How many of you all have read Alanna's book? Well, I know our book club, right? You always got to talk with Alanna, but quite a few of you have. They just got to talk to her just a few minutes ago. Before I bring Alanna up to talk about her book, to talk about Elvis and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, most of the images, Nick, I don't know what happened to our images. Just on cue, right there. So most of the images that you're going to see behind me are Courier-Journal images of the different trips here to U of L, and one from the U of L archives. Alanna and I counted, we think it was 6 visits in all to Louisville, starting with his first in 1955 at the Rialto Theater with Hank Snow, which was a big part of that movie, right, with the Hank Snow at the beginning, as part of the Philip Morris show, so that was 1955. Alanna will talk about Elvis, his Louisville connections. So we're going to bring her up now to get us started. We're going to save time at the end for some questions that I have for her, and more importantly, questions that you have for her. So please welcome the preeminent expert on Elvis Presley, Alanna Nash.
Wow, isn't this fun? And sold out house. Well, we're gonna rock this house today, or in the immortal words of Elvis Aaron Presley, let's get real gone for a change.
Yeah.
You might not realize it, but Elvis has a number of connections to Louisville. And I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit, and then I'm going to read something for you that I wrote for my book about Colonel Parker that got cut out because I wrote too much. But I'll tell you about that in a minute. So, Elvis in Louisville. First of all, as Rachel told you, he played Louisville 6 times. The first was December 8th, 1955 at the Rialto Theater with Hank Snow, and also the Duke of Paducah as part of a Philip Morris Company employees show. Jack Guthrie knows something about that. There are photos of the Marquis and of him on stage with Bill Black and Scotty Moore at U of L in the Lynn Caulfield collection. I think you had one of those up here today. The second appearance was November 25th, 1956 at the Armory for 2 shows. This was at the height of his newly found fame. There are existing ticket stubs for both the matinee and the evening show online, and I have one too. That's a prized possession of mine. My mother wouldn't let me go to the show because she deemed that I was too young, and I cried all night and waited for my sister to come home. She'd gotten to go with my cousins, and I confiscated her program and immediately tore off the front cover and sent it off to Graceland for an autograph. An autograph did come back some months later. I'm sure it was not Elvis's. I've gotten to know several of the women who used to sign those autographs, but it's still fun to have. His paternal grandfather, Jesse D. Presley, lived in Louisville, and he attended that 1956 show.
Wow.
There was a rumor that Elvis made an impromptu appearance at Colonial Gardens during this Louisville date, as it was close to the home of his grandfather and step-grandmother, who he was visiting at the time. But that is highly doubtful that he appeared at Colonial Gardens. There are no photos of him there, and no one has ever come forth to say they saw him there. I can confirm, however, that he stayed at the Sealback for that date, even though Colonel Parker told me himself that he was very fond of the Brown Hotel and had stayed there on numerous occasions. The police filmed that show for the FBI in 1956 because Elvis Presley was said to be obscene and endangering the morals of our youth. In fact, a judge had set in on a show in Jacksonville, Florida, the previous August, waiting to have Elvis arrested if he did anything lewd. One of the TV stations here, it might be WHAS, has aired some of that Louisville footage in years past. Do you know if it's WHAS?
I've seen the footage. My guess is yes, just because that or Wave would be
right.
One of the
It's
two.
one of the two.
Yeah.
Right. The third appearance was November 7th, 1971 at Freedom Hall, where from the stage he introduced his grandfather, Jesse, who was then 74 years old. It had been 15 years since Elvis had last appeared in town, and that's how long it had been since Jesse and his wife, Vera Leftwich Presley, a retired teacher from Metcalfe County, had seen him perform. And in our audience today is Vera's granddaughter, Rita Leftwich Miller. You want to stand or raise your hand? And Rita has been kind enough to say that she will talk to anybody afterwards who wants to ask her a question or two. Elvis's fourth Louisville appearance was June 26, 1974 at Freedom Hall on his manager, Colonel Tom Parker's 65th birthday. And the entourage sang happy birthday to him on the tarmac at Stanford Field.
Oh, wow.
The fifth appearance was July 23rd, 1976, also at Freedom Hall, and I attended this show. I took my mother, who absolutely adored Elvis, and said to me when I was 7, when his voice matures, he's going to be a great singer. And I laughed and laughed at that because Elvis belonged to us, to the youth. What was my mother, who was something like 34 years old, ancient, doing thinking about Elvis? But when I took her to the show in 1976, what I remember is I remember standing out in the broiling sun for hours to get tickets. And then at the show, it was the first time I'd ever seen concert goers standing on their chairs. As for Elvis's performance, he was pretty much just going through the motions. He did not seem very healthy. And the sixth and last time he appeared here was May 21st, 1977 at Freedom Hall. It was during this appearance that the infamous ice bucket incident occurred, that you saw in the Elvis film, Baz Luhrmann, according to Larry Geller, a member of Elvis's entourage, the so-called Memphis Mafia. In the film, Luhrmann doesn't set this in Louisville, but in the hallway in Las Vegas. Indeed, it was in a hotel room here. And I was interested, who was the lady who mentioned the Roadway Inn from 1976? Yeah, thanks. Do you know where he stayed in 1977?
I was at the show, but I do not. I don't know that. I was at the show though.
I'm sorry, do you
I
know?
think it was the executive that stayed.
I think it was the executive inn also, yeah. And why do you think that?
Oh, gosh. Swirls from.
Yeah,
different-
I think that's where this happened, the ice bucket happened, over there in Ziegler. Yep. The essence for people who haven't seen the film or read about this is that Elvis was in no shape to go on stage, and Dr. George Nicopolis dunked his head in a bucket of ice or cold water. And that Colonel Parker witnessed this and said, despite Elvis's condition, the only thing that matters is that Elvis is on that stage tonight. Larry Geller told me that incident, and that's where we got that. 3 months later, Elvis was dead. He died on August 16th, which happened to be my birthday, a day that changed the course of my life. I've spent the last 45 years writing about Elvis and studying him since 1956. He was to play Lexington on the tour that was canceled when he died. The Courier Journal assigned a photographer to many of these shows, which you're seeing, but not all of them. They did Court Best, who I believe is the uncle of Pat McDonough, who's photo editor down there for years, at the paper, took those pictures of the 56 Armory appearance. They did not assign a photographer or me to review the 77 show. I was the pop reviewer at the paper and would have been the one to do that. But my editor did not think he deemed coverage then. He was seen as over the hill and washed up and kind of a joke. All of that changed after he died, of course. We did extensive coverage for months. The second big Louisville connection, as I alluded to, is the grandfather connection. So Elvis's paternal grandfather, Jesse D. Presley, Vernon's dad, it was a longtime resident of Louisville. And students of Elvis remember that Elvis that had a twin who died at birth. It was Elvis Aaron and Jesse Guerin, and that child was named for Vernon's father. Jesse helped Vernon build the little house in Tupelo, Mississippi, where Elvis was born on January 8th, 1935, or, as Rachel said, unbelievably, 88 years ago today. Hard to think of Elvis as 88. Jesse was a ladies' man in his youth and a dandy and a bit of a carouser. And he left Minnie May in 1942 and went to Mobile, Alabama, among other places, and eventually landed in Louisville. They divorced in 1948 when the Presleys moved from Tupelo to Memphis. And Minnie May really never had a good word to say about him, but many other people did, particularly those in Louisville. Jesse was a carpenter, a cabinet maker by trade, and he also worked as a night watchman at the local Pepsi-Cola plant. And that's where he retired in 1964. He also worked at Mengel Furniture Company and as a wooden mantle assembler at Columbia Manufacturing Company, also known as the Columbia Mantle Company on 9th Street, not very far from here. From 1958 until his death in 1973, he lived at 4008 Beaver Street off Taylor Boulevard near Iroquois Park. He was a member of Lynn Acres Baptist Church and allegedly made a lectern for the church and was a deacon there. He also enjoyed a long marriage to Vera Leftwich Presley, Rita's grandmother, who lived in Louisville until her death in 1981 at age 89. She died at Jewish Hospital. Despite Minnie May's ire toward her former husband, Elvis and Vernon appeared to be rather fond of him. On Sunday, November 25th, 1956, Elvis played 2 shows at the Armory, and the next day he paid a visit to his grandfather on Beaver Street, bearing gifts. He brought with him a brand new 1957 Ford Fairlane, which he bought here in town, a new TV set, which he carried in the trunk as a surprise, and he handed Vera $100. I have a photo of Elvis's checkbook, for which he took out $2,000. And the notation says, paid to the order of Elvis Presley, cash, for purchase of car for grandparents, Louisville, Kentucky. That left a balance in the account of $2,670.45. There's also a photo of Jesse and Vera all dressed up and standing next to their new car, and another photo of the Ford visible just inside the Graceland gates for a visit. The Presleys weren't used to luxury and thought their king-size bed at Graceland was so enormous that Jesse called over to Vera, "How's the weather over there?" The car, by the way, is being restored here in Louisville. My friend Tony Stutzberry and his wife Alma, visiting from England, and I were thrilled to meet the owner and see the car a few years back. Jesse was proud of his grandson and kept a collection of scrapbooks about him. But Jesse also attempted to cash in on Elvis's fame and recorded a couple of little songs. One was called "Who's That Kicking My Dog Around?" with the Billy Goat song, and "Swingin' in the Orchard," and recorded these for a Louisville concern. He then went on "I've Got a Secret" and other shows in 1958 to promote them, singing from a rocking chair. His secret, of course, is that he was Elvis's grandfather. Some folks think Elvis didn't like that, but if so, he got over it because Elvis even wrote to his grandfather, and writing letters was something he didn't do very often, while he was in the Army, and he sent him Christmas cards too. And Vernon used to come to Louisville to see his dad. When Elvis was in Germany in the service, Vernon and Minnie Mae went with him, and they all lived together off base. However, Vernon came back to the States when Elvis made a trip to Paris in the summer of 1959, and Vernon came to Louisville to see Jesse. Gladys, Elvis's mother, had not been dead even a year, but by that time, Vernon was already involved with a woman named Dee Stanley, and he took her to Graceland to persuade her that she could bring her boys there and they could make a life together. And he also brought her to Louisville to introduce her to Jesse. On November 7, 1971, as I said, Elvis played Freedom Hall, where from the stage he introduced his grandfather in the audience. Bill Peterson covered the show for the Courier-Journal and quoted a fan who waited for the show to start. She said, "I just love Elvis. If I die before he gets here, I want my corpse left right here." The day before, the paper tried to interview the senior Presleys, but only Vera is quoted in the story. Peterson wrote, "Jesse, whose own singing career floundered after 3 television appearances in 1958, probably shouldn't go to the concert. He had a heart attack last Christmas and has been in bad health ever since." Says Mrs. Presley, "Some have asked, do you think he can live through it? I tell them I know he can't live without going. He loves that boy." Continuing to read, the Presleys live in a small bungalow in southern Louisville. Elvis visited them for lunch the last time he appeared in town. There must have been 500 people follow him, Mrs. Presley recalls. "They'd like to have killed me the way they swarmed around. Elvis told us that day, 'Grandma, I'll never be back here again. This is too much trouble for you all.'" Jesse Presley died on March 19th, 1973, at 76, of a heart attack at the Old Methodist Hospital. For obvious reasons, Elvis did not attend his funeral. He's buried in Louisville Memorial Gardens behind the old Bacons in Shively. And I've taken several visitors there to see that stone, which is flat and a bit hard to find. And Vera is buried next to him. And it's kind of an odd feeling to stand there and think that these folks had that connection and lived through it all, and some DNA in that ground that it's pretty famous. As I mentioned, in 1977, the year Elvis died, I was working as the pop music reviewer for the Courier-Journal and covered the funeral and wrote a series of articles about Elvis for the paper and for syndication. I tried to interview Vera and went and knocked on her door and tried to phone her, but she wasn't receiving when Elvis died, understandably. I also put in a call to Vernon, and he called me back, much to my surprise. I think that was mostly because of his attachment to Louisville and his father. And finally, I want to mention B&K Enterprises costume company in Charlestown, Indiana, which is known worldwide as the premier maker of recreations of Elvis's most famous stage wear by designers Bill Beaulieu and Jean Doucette. B&K made Michael Shannon's Superfly costume for the 2014 film Elvis and Nixon, as well as costumes for the 2002 film Bubba Hotep, and for 2001's 3,000 Miles to Graceland, as well as for 1998's Finding Graceland. And the company is also credited in the current Baz Luhrmann film, Elvis. In 2007, President George Bush hosted the Prime Minister of Japan, who was a huge Elvis fan. And B&K provided an Aloha Eagle cape and belt for both of them at the request of Elvis Presley Enterprises to be presented as gifts to them during their visit to Graceland. As a quick aside, I interviewed General Colin Powell, who was a friend of that Prime Minister, and he launched into an impersonation of the Prime Minister, oohing and awing about having been to Graceland, and he did this in a Japanese accent, which I guess was not very PC, but it was hilarious to hear Colin Powell, the Prime Minister of Japan, all enthused about going to Graceland. So the bond between Elvis and Louisville continues, and I imagine it always will. I also, I knew Colonel Parker, I won't say fairly well, but I knew him intently or intensely. I say that because he wasn't an easy man to know. Even people who've known him for many decades can't say that they truly knew him. He was very secretive. If you've read The Colonel, you know why. But he was a fascinating, fascinating character. And when he died, I remember thinking, oh, now we'll never know his story. We'll never know the truth about who he was. And my agent, who lived in Louisville, said, you know, Alanna, you have to write that book. And I said, oh, gosh. Me? No. That book is impossible to write. The guy left no paper trail. You can't trace this guy anywhere, really. But of course, she was right. I had to do it, and it did take me 6 years to do the research. And I honestly think that Colonel was more interesting than Elvis in lots of ways. I made 3 visits to Las Vegas to meet with him over a period of years. And I wrote a long prelude or preface to my book about those visits. But when I actually started writing the manuscript in earnest, I had 500 pages before he ever met Elvis. And my editor, who was the legendary Michael Korda at Simon & Schuster, said, Alanna, this won't do. You have to think of it as a romance novel. When does he meet him? So I had to cut a lot, and that included this prelude or preface. But I've shortened it to present to audiences, and they seem to like it. I read it at the Library of Congress in August, and people really were enthusiastic about it. And so I thought I would read it for you today as well, and I hope you enjoy it. I called it My Lunches with Andre, which is a play on the name of the film, My Dinner with Andre. The Colonel's real name was Andreas Cornelis van Kalk. He was from Holland, passed himself off as Tom Parker from West Virginia. Wow. The old man slumped in his seat, a mountainous heap of flesh. His body, some might have said, a temple to gluttony, greed, and feeding off the dimmer wits of others. He was holding court on this morning in December 1992 in booth number 1 of the Sirocco Springs coffee shop at the Las Vegas Hilton. It was his booth, perpetually reserved for the man whose act and whose own high roller activity had meant so many millions for the hotel that no one could keep count anymore. At the Hilton, Colonel Tom Parker, AKA Andreas Cornelis van Kalk, an illegal alien from Holland who invented rock and roll culture through his most famous client, Elvis Presley, inspired fear and trepidation among the bosses and employees alike. Larry, he yelled belligerently to a man who had hurried past without stopping. Pay your respects. And then he turned back to his guests, Lori Morgan, the country singer he had booked into the hotel's showroom, and Lori's mother, Anna Trainer. 40 years earlier, Parker had handled dates for her first husband, the late Grand Ole Opry star, George Morgan. Today, the 83-year-old Parker was in a sentimental mood, a godsend for me. I had come to Las Vegas specifically to find the Colonel and had brought along my friend Judy May to boost my courage. I had a request of the Colonel. I was writing a book with 3 members of Elvis's entourage, the Memphis Mafia, and I wanted Parker to respond to their allegations that Parker mismanaged and defrauded the star. I also hoped he would comment on the 1980 report filed by the court-appointed guardian of Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, who inherited the singer's fortune. The report deemed Parker's 50% commission excessive, unfair to the estate, and beyond all reasonable bounds of industry standards. Most members of the Memphis Mafia believed that Parker's mishandling of Elvis inadvertently brought about the entertainer's artistic and physical demise. And I wanted the Colonel to have the opportunity to redeem his reputation as the villain in the Presley saga. But more than anything, I wanted a chance to meet Colonel Parker, to hear how he spoke, watch how he moved and conducted himself. And so, acting on a tip from Morgan's manager that he would be in the coffee shop at this hour, Judy and I cabbed over to the Hilton from our room at the Mirage and sat at a table with an unobstructed view of booth number 1. In my mind, I practiced how I would break the ice, remind him that he had once signed a photo for me at the request of Alan Fortas, one of the few members of the Memphis Mafia who spoke glowingly of him. I had ghostwritten a book for Fortas just before he died of bladder cancer earlier that year. When Morgan and her mother got up to leave, Judy and I made our way over. Up close, the Colonel looked ancient. Yellowed skin with liver spots sprinkling his hands and face like so many insects. His chest resembled a spent tea bag inside a white shirt and black and gray geometric design sweater. Somehow he'd managed to stuff his girth into a pair of gray trousers. A brown felt cowboy hat festooned with a feather band crowned his head. His wooden cane lay beside him in the seat. Colonel Parker, I wanted to introduce myself, I began. I'm Alanna Nash. I was Alan Fortas' friend. What? Said a blank-faced colonel, who had snuggled a flesh-toned hearing aid into the recesses of each ear. Parker's wife, Loanne, a tall, long-faced woman, 25 years his junior, came to my rescue. You remember, Colonel, she said, taking his arm. This is the lady who wrote Alan's book. You signed a photo for her, and we sent it to Alan. Oh, yes, came the reply. He brightened. You want another picture? Without waiting for an answer, he produced a felt-tip pen and motioned toward his briefcase. Loanne, give me some pictures. You know, I called Alan 79 times, he began. Every Sunday, and for a while every day. And I called Priscilla Presley and told her to go see him. I even called the members of the Jewish community to get them to go to the funeral. You were very kind to Alan, I said, all the time wondering why, since I had been told that Parker always had an ulterior motive in any friendship, and remembering that Alan was the nephew of Lyndon Johnson's close advisor, Abe Fortas, a Supreme Court judge, and LBJ's failed nominee for Chief Justice. Colonel shrugged his shoulders. Well, you know, he said, his voice brittle, high, and hoarse. Old ties, old friendships. I introduced my friend, and Colonel asked her if she wrote books too. No, I'm a broker, Judy said. Colonel's azure eyes snapped to attention. Smart, he said, smiling. You handle the money. And then he was off on a one-man PR campaign for the reputation of Colonel Tom Parker, attempting to persuade us that despite his glee at the mention of money, he routinely gave it away whenever a deserving cause crossed his path. I sensed he was just getting started. Would it be all right if we joined you? I asked. Oh, sure, he said. We slid into the vinyl seats. You want something to eat? Order anything you want off the menu. We declined his invitation, but watched as he polished off his meal. The Colonel was naturally right-handed, but an accident at the RCA building in Hollywood some years back, he had fallen while entering the elevator, and the door had repeatedly pummeled him in what some would call Elvis's poetic justice, had virtually frozen his right shoulder. Now he gripped his fork in his left fist and used it as a shovel. Parker gave off vibrations that said, don't ask me any questions, and if you do, they better not be about Elvis. But Loanne, a dark-haired woman who had served as Parker's secretary and married him after the death of his first wife, kept the tone light. Isn't he wonderful, she beamed, her melodic voice filled with childlike wonder. Suddenly I remembered to tell him about the Memphis Mafia book, but the timing felt wrong. Colonel was putting on a show for us, and to bring up such an indelicate topic now would spoil the moment. I decided to write to him once I got home. Do you think we could have a picture together? Judy asked, producing a camera from her purse. Colonel looked pleased. All four of us, he said, and began to heave himself up from the cushy seat. The wooden cane wobbled, and the old man grew as red and shaky as aspic. But I didn't dare help. I've been told the Colonel loathed to be touched, especially by women. Finally, he pulled himself upright and steadied his weight. Flash, and then three more. Colonel, I said, thank you so much for your time. Me too, said Judy, who, uninformed about the no-touch rule, rushed in and kissed him on the cheek. My blood stopped flowing. Colonel looked stunned, but not entirely unhappy. You caught me in a weakened state, he said, and recounted how he used to wear fake warts with blood coming out of them to keep women away. Oh. It worked, he grinned. No kissing. We stood there laughing, and then Colonel surprised me again. If I can help you in any way, let me know, he said. I told him I appreciated it. Hey, he went on, you got more time than anybody, and it didn't cost you nothing. He turned to Judy. You like gambling? On your way out, look for the spin till you win machine. It's over in the far corner. Best payoff in the house. The following morning, the phone rang at 9:20. You didn't know I was an FBI agent, did you? Though I'd never mentioned where I was staying, the Colonel had tracked me down. Say, I sure liked your friend, he said. I thought maybe the two of you would like to go tonight to see the Starlight Express, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, also playing at the Hilton. I got tickets for you if you like. Since Colonel seldom gave away free tickets to any of Elvis's shows, this seems completely out of character. As it turned out, we couldn't go, but I thanked him for his kindness. You know, I was thinking about other ways to promote Alan's book, he began. I listened politely, and then I told him I was working on something else now, the Memphis Mafia story. His tone changed abruptly. Oh, well, there are already too many books, and there'll be more, he said. The more there are, the less they'll sell. A week later, I sent him a Christopher Radko Christmas ornament in the shape of a circus elephant, since he prided his collection of elephant memorabilia. I never heard back. In the spring of 1994, I was well into the writing of the book and took another crack at getting the Colonel's cooperation. I was coming to town in June, I wrote him, and asked for a short interview. I wish you luck with your book, he replied, and both of us will be glad to see you when you visit here, but not in the capacity of you being a writer, just a friend. At exactly noon, Colonel was a stickler about promptness. A blood-red Buick pulled up at the valet stand in front of the Hilton. Loanne sat behind the wheel, and Parker, dressed for the 106-degree heat, in blue trousers under a light blue smock of a shirt with Colonel embroidered on it, sat motionless beside her in the front seat, a blue newsboy cap perched jauntily on his head. I climbed in the back, and Loanne offered a smile. But whether Colonel's shoulder injury prevented it or not, he never turned around. He didn't need to. He had eyes in the back of his head. I see you're keeping your weight down, he said. Things got looser at the New Orleans restaurant, an informal meet-and-two place in Lucky's shopping center. The difficulty in being around Colonel was that he didn't invite much of a real exchange. Parker was his own sideshow, and you were there to watch it. We were deep into our second visit now, and he still hadn't really broached the obvious topic, Elvis. I'm almost 85, you know, the Colonel said. His birthday was 8 days away, and celebrations had always been special to him. Yes, Colonel, I said, happy birthday. I've been trying to think of a good gift for you. The old man was ready. I want something I don't have to feed, dust, polish, wash, or walk. What's that, Colonel? Your loyalty and friendship, he said. And he might have added admiration. Back in the car, Colonel finally began to answer my questions about the lousy movies Elvis made and the poor songs written for those films. He hammered his words home with the tap of his cane on the floor mat. He wasn't happy with my line of questions. I knew Elvis better than anybody. I wouldn't see him sometimes for 2 months, but we'd talk every week. Elvis was very sharp, even if people thought he wasn't. And he wasn't weak either. Elvis picked all his own songs and pictures. The scripts were sent directly to his house. The only song I suggested was Are You Lonesome Tonight? I got Elvis the most money ever for an entertainer in Las Vegas. People forget that. Nobody got more money in the history of Las Vegas. His anger hung in the air. Colonel, if you feel you've been misrepresented, then why don't you set the record straight? I don't have no trouble sleeping. People who worry about things like that don't sleep good. The William Morris Agency told me they could get me $2 million for a book, but publishers today want dirt, and I am not a dirt farmer. His voice rose, and for a moment, I thought he might order me out of the car. I'm going to tell you something I want you to remember, he said. When a baby has to go, you take off its diaper. You don't want no dirty diaper on a baby. I'll remember it, Colonel, I said, even though I don't have the faintest idea what it means. Loanne chuckled. The Colonel stared ahead. I saw him one more time in December 1994 on a record company junket to Vegas. I called the Colonel, who once again invited me to lunch, this time at the more upscale Hungry Hunter on South Rainbow Boulevard. When the food came, Colonel sent his roast beef back 3 times. It's too rare. It's not hot enough. Hey, put another piece of meat on there. And then to my surprise, he began picking Elvis topics out of the air, but all self-serving. How he chose all the record cover photographs. How he packaged an album made up entirely of Elvis's on-stage prattle. And most important, how Vernon Presley announced that Colonel Parker is an honest man in a taped postscript to Elvis in Concert, the CBS television special, shot in the summer of 1977 and aired after Elvis's death. On the way back to town, Loanne made a quick swing to pick up the mail at the post office. Be right back, she said. And for the first and only time, Parker and I were alone. Say, I want to run a title past you because I respect your opinion, he said. I wrote a song. Oh, I didn't know you wrote songs, Colonel. Yes. I can't write music, but I want to know what you think of this title. I talked to myself about you. I liked it and told him so, not mentioning that we both knew that Fred Rose had thought of it half a century before, and that Parker's own client, Eddie Arnold, had recorded the song in 1945. I wondered if he were talking in code again, sending me a message. When Loanne came back with a dozen birthday cards, the Colonel's face lit up. We rode along without talking for a while, and then the back of the head spoke again. We've adopted a son, you know. Oh yes? A 4-footed one? I should say not. Loanne, where's that picture? Loanne dug around in her purse and then handed back a tattered picture of a large homemade-looking boy doll, a Rag Street vendor doll, as it turned out, posed with a teddy bear. Boy and bear, Colonel announced proudly. Very handsome, I lied. What's his name? Andre. Isn't Andreas? The jolt of hearing Colonel Parker pronounce the Dutch name he had hidden from the world for 65 years rendered me temporarily speechless. I held the snapshot for maybe 30 seconds, looking at it intently, not knowing what to say. Loanne, Parker chided, get your picture back. Colonel, she's not going to steal it, she said, and reached back toward my outstretched hand. Well, offered Colonel as the Buick pulled up in front of the curb, I hope you've enjoyed your afternoon. He sounded like he meant it. You know I have, Colonel, I said, mindful that this was probably the last time I would see him. Neither one of us felt well today, he added, but we didn't want to disappoint you. I don't like to hurt people. With that, he was gone. In January 1997, he would die of a stroke, taking his secrets with him, including why he ever put up with me.
I know I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask, and then I want to open it up to the audience. Just listening to that, I'm still mystified by the man,
Yeah.
as I was after the
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
Hard to nail down, an enigma.
Yeah.
I mean, was he the villain that after you left that movie, you were just horrified by everything? I mean, was he the villain that the movie portrayed him to be?
Well, you know, a movie needs a villain, of course. But the Colonel's legacy is a complicated one, I would say. You know, he really is, honestly, the father of American popular culture. Because he drew a straight line from the ballyhoo stage of the Carnival, where he worked for many years, to the makeshift performance platforms of rock and roll, all through the merchandising and promotion of his client. And he's notable in the ways he figured out how to keep his star on top and in protecting the rights of dead celebrities and their estates. He made a lot of really smart decisions in managing Elvis, and some that were really not quite so great for his client, but were very good for him. And so it's a complicated legacy.
It really is. You wrote this in 2003, and I'm not trying to stir the pot, but how much did the movie borrow, if that's the right word, from your book?
It used a lot, it did. There are a couple things that are verbatim. There's a piece of dialogue that's verbatim. Of course, you know, the arc of Parker's story is now commonplace and part of the culture. But there are some things that specifically could only have come from my book. And kind of my favorite example of this is the first time I saw it 4 times in the theater. The first time I saw it, you know, there's a scene where Hank's son brings in this 45 of Elvis that he's playing, I guess it's 78. And the Colonel gets interested in Elvis's voice and what he thinks he might represent. And so we see the caravan then pull out, the Hankstone caravan pulls out in an aerial shot. And over that aerial shot, you hear the colonel say, it doesn't matter if you do 10 stupid things, as long as you do one thing right. I thought, wow, where have I heard that? I've heard that somewhere. The second time I saw the film, I thought, oh, I need to look that up. Somebody said that, who said that? The third time I went home and looked it up, and I went, oh my God, this is directly from my book. It's from an interview with a fellow named Byron Raphael. And I'm the only person who ever interviewed Byron. He was in his last months by the time I found him, and he was a junior junior William Morris agent assigned to the colonel. And I did hours and hours and hours of interviews with him. And that's a quote that absolutely came from the book. There are many other instances, you know, I made a list, there's something like 42 things.
Do you have to let that go, or?
I don't know, I'm still thinking about that. But I spoke with Baz Luhrmann, did an interview with him for AARP online.
And when was that?
That was just before the film came out.
Okay.
And I asked him if he had read my book. I hadn't seen the film yet. And he said that he is dyslexic and so he doesn't read. But that his team read it and pulled out things from it along with things from many other books to put up on the board to decide what they were going to use. So that's as close as he came to.
To credit. Yes, to credit. So
Yes.
I'm curious, because I can't remember, I mean, now that it's on HBO, when it's on, I watch it, kind of thing. What do you think they got most right in the movie? Well, first of all, did you like the movie?
On the whole, I find it mesmerizing and incredibly entertaining.
Because this audience, right, everybody for the most part really liked it, right?
Those opening sequences and that young boy of Elvis watching the African American couple dance and then going to the revival, the tent revival, that is riveting cinema.
And gave you a picture of
Yes.
how he came
Yes.
to be and influences.
Yes. You know, as a journalist, I have problems with historical problems with the film. The Rustwood concert, the Rustwood Park concert, the Memphis concert, there wasn't a riot there.
That's when he sang Evil.
When he sang Trouble.
Or was
Trouble.
it?
Yeah.
Why am I thinking Evil?
And he had
and then he
recorded
went
that.
off and
Yeah, right. I mean,
yeah.
he didn't record that till the following year. But you know, as a moviegoer, you understand that a director has to telescope events. There are some things that were really kind of jaw-dropping, though. Gladys is a falling down drunk? No. Gladys snipped a little bit from a brown paper bag. I interviewed many people who knew Gladys. But the few people who were still living who knew her well were really aghast at that. I mean, no one ever said she was a falling down drunk. And I'm really kind of surprised that the estate stood for that.
Interesting, because they were involved
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
And the performance of Austin Butler, just so you all know, the last picture here, that is one of the outfits from B&K Enterprises, because I can't remember how many ended up in the film that they ended up doing. I'll show you when it comes up. What did you think of Austin Butler? Because when you say somebody's going to do somebody as iconic as Elvis, you just wonder how on earth does somebody pull that off? Do you think he did?
I do, and honestly, I do.
Everybody
think,
here?
Yes.
Did anybody say no? Anybody have a problem with him? Okay, somebody in the back row had it.
Well, you're always aware that it's Austin Butler. I mean, because he really doesn't look much like him. But my goodness, he really had those moves down. You know, I really didn't think anybody could do it. I thought they would really need to rely on archival footage of Elvis. But he was astonishing. And you know, what the film got really right, I think, is that Elvis's appeal is rooted in his originality, in the depth of his artistry, his sexual daring, and his looks and sound. He was almost equal parts male and female, and white and black, and in the early days, country and blues. Now, the film omits his white influences. We're led to believe it's almost entirely black influences. That's not correct, but you know, I understand why Luhrmann did that, just as I understand why Elvis has no other girlfriends ever except Dixie Glock prior to Priscilla, and then no one else ever.
That was it.
Except for, you know, a girl on the road. So when the journalist in me steps back and just enjoys the film, I find it enormously fascinating. And those 2 hours and 39 minutes really zip by, don't they?
Because it was a long movie.
Yeah, it's a long
And
movie.
you said when I first came up to you, you said you wore these colors.
Yes,
And
rock and roll
so,
colors.
all right, so
Pink and
explain that.
Well, when Elvis first came on the scene in '55, before he had really the big national scene, he wanted everything, including his stationery fan club, to be pink and black. Those were his colors. So when I was deciding what I would wear, I thought, well, what would Elvis wear?
So when Tom
What would
Parker,
Elvis do?
that was that pink and black
That's
that he
right.
had on
That's right.
in that first concert that you saw. Okay, very
In the
good.
film.
I want to open it up to you all. Who has questions for Alanna? Oh, Jane, go ahead, stand up. I'm going to bring you the microphone.
Jane, nice to see you. I have so many friends here. I'm just so thrilled that you came out today. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to say first, as somebody who's interviewed you several times, that I think Louisville's connections with Elvis should include the fact that you live in Louisville.
Oh, you're very kind.
And I wondered if you would share your experience as a journalist after Elvis died,
Yeah.
going and actually witnessing Elvis's body.
Yes. I was telling the book club about that before the program. I would, as you know, I mentioned, the paper put John Filiatro and me on the plane, on the company plane, and flew us down there, and we didn't really know what we were doing except writing about the gathering, the funeral, and we split up. Initially, we stood in line. We're not in line. There was, when you first got to Graceland on August 17th, the guy on the 16th, as far as you could see, were people lined up on either side of the gates, because Vernon had announced that Elvis would be, fans would be allowed to come through and pay their respects, which had not been done with Gladys, and people were very upset about that. So we arrived at Graceland, and it was just a sea of people. I'd never seen Graceland before. It was my first trip to Memphis. I knew no one in Memphis. And you don't know heat until you've been to Memphis in August. People were fainting on the lawn, those who were lucky enough to get on the lawn, fainting from grief, from heat. It was just this ocean of people in distress, of a kind of. But there were very few press people there. And you know, the network newscast did not lead off with the death of Elvis. And really, it was only NBC who later that night decided to do some special programming to talk about culturally what this meant.
Which is shocking.
It is shocking.
Yeah.
It is shocking today. But this was a huge cultural impact, the death of Elvis, unexpected by most. And a lot of people went from literally all over the world because they felt as if a family member had died. But not many press. So John and I were standing there up near the door. First of all, it was very surreal to be on the grounds and to be pretty close to the door where they had a stand. And mostly local broadcast people. Jackson Baker was there from Memphis Magazine. I remember talking to him. And a guy who I later learned was Dick Grove, the head of Elvis Security, came out with a bullhorn, which he did not need because there were only about 20 people, press people there. And because John and I were standing off to the side, he came over to where we were and he said, members of the press who wish to view Mr. President, line up behind these two. And that was us. And I'm like, I'm not going for it. John's like, you go for it. You go for it. I don't know which one of us actually went in first, but we did. And we could get very close. They had him right in the foyer, right by the stairs. And you could get very close, but you couldn't stop. You had to keep going. Because they were going to let in all of these thousands of people who were lined up down Elvis Presley Boulevard. I was telling the book club, I don't know what I expected him to look like. I don't know if I thought he was going to be in a white jumpsuit. I don't know what I thought. But I was surprised at how he looked. He had on a white dress suit, which I later learned his father had given him for Christmas, a light blue dress shirt, and a long silver tie. And he looked very, very, very waxy. And I remember a woman behind me saying, "Why, he looks like a tub." I wasn't sure what a tub looked like, but I guess she thought he looked large. To me, he did not look particularly large. I just couldn't get over that he looked very, very Mexican. So it came out, and I thought, I'm not sure that's Elvis Presley. Jay knows this too. So I thought, his popularity is kind of waned. Maybe this is a great Colonel Parker joke. And Elvis is in the Bahamas, and this is a wax dummy. I have to go through again.
Don't start these conspiracy theories. Do not.
Elvis flexibility.
So I went through again. And then I came out, and I was even more confused. And then I tried to go through a third time, and God called me out. He said, "No, you've only been through twice. You're only supposed to go through once." Now I know why he looked waxy. He was indeed Elvis Presley. He had been dead a long time before they found him, and the mortician really had a job to do. So
Yeah, because he had been in the bathroom and
he had
was
fallen on
discovered.
his face.
Right.
Yeah, and he was, I guess the polite way to say it, discolored. He was
Right.
discolored, yes.
So there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
We only have about 5 more minutes. Yes, sir.
Did you ever interview Dewey Phillips?
No, I didn't. I
And
think
say who
Dewey was
that is?
gone. Dewey Phillips was a DJ in Memphis who was the first to play Elvis's records. And Dewey was gone by the time I was old enough to start writing about.
We're from Memphis. And
Yeah. We grew up in those hot August days
know.
without air conditioning.
Oh my goodness. And lived to tell the tale.
And lived to tell it.
And Rita, I did want to ask you one question. Go ahead and stand up because you were related to Elvis and you met him several times, but we said so sadly you don't have pictures of that. How old were you when you first met him? And just kind of give us your remembrances of him.
I was 2 when my grandmother married Jesse Presley. And then I was 11 when he was at the Armory. So he was 10 years older than me. And, he saw us in the seats and so forth, and we got to go backstage. And I was just a kid. I thought, it's family. And it wasn't a big deal, apparently, back then to me. And then, of course, he became more popular and more popular. And I would like to tell the story when I was in middle school. In middle school, we called it junior high back then. And I was going, my grandparents lived off of Taylor Boulevard, and so did we, but we lived close to the park. And I was taking swimming lessons at Wyandotte Pool, if any of y'all know the South Side. And my best friend was going with me. Well, they didn't have cell phones or any of that back then. And I told my mom, she's like, well, Vernon's going to be here today. And I said, well, I've got Pam with me. And, well, just make her promise not to say anything. So she promised, and of course, when we got to the house, she shook his hand. She's like, oh my God, I'm never going to wash my hands. The next day at school, I'm sitting in class, and the teacher said, you need to go to the office. I had not a clue what I was a good little girl. And so I went in to see the assistant principal, and he said, why on earth would you tell such a lie that you're related to Elvis Presley? And I said, I didn't tell that, and it's not a lie. I said, call my mother. My mother came down there. We just lived across the street, and she came over there and was furious. And she's like, don't ever call my daughter, So ever since then, my sister was unable to come today. We would kind of stayed out of the public light because, except to, some people, but now since we're older, we're thinking, what the heck?